Welcome. This month that we're having Dr. Luke Elson from the University of Reading, who's going to be talking about whether luck, or does luck play a part in doing the right thing. As usual, I'm your host I'm Gurpreet Singh from Ethical Reading. I'll give you a couple of minutes introduction to Ethical Reading, then we'll hand over to Luke and listen to his webinar. So Ethical Reading is fairly new, set up a couple of years ago, and we're a not-for-profit social enterprise. Our mission very much is to embed ethics into the way we live and work in Reading. And we want to do this by inspiring people that they have a choice when they make decisions. We want to provide some education, because we do believe that through education and learning, sharing good practice, we can become better at making the right choices and doing the right thing. And we very much believe in collaborating with other organisations. And this is a great example of working with the University of Reading around education through these webinars. We have over 40 partners and supporters now that are supporting us on this mission, and over 2,500 individual members and followers. And we hope that you will join up as a member as well. It's easy to do on our website, and you'll get notification of webinars and other online events that are happening as well. We run entirely by volunteers, around 20, and we hope that Reading is the start of something bigger, which we call the Ethical Cities Movement, and we do have some interest around the world from other cities to do that. We do a whole bunch of things. We've got a website. We do meetups, which have been face-to-face sessions and things like breakfast seminars. Now, given the situation actually around the world at the moment in terms of COVID-19 and social distancing requirements, we are moving a lot of these activities online. So please do keep an eye out on our website you'll be notified of events that are happening online, and we hope to include some interactivity in those as well as we go forward. So a little bit there around what we do. And now I'm going to hand over to Luke. And does luck play a part in doing the right thing? Over to you, Luke.
Great. Thank you, Gurpreet. I'm Luke Elson. I teach in the philosophy department at the University of Reading, and I've been here since 2014. Work mostly in ethics, moral philosophy, and like Ethical Reading, we're in the process of moving a lot of things over to online at the moment because of the pandemic. And so you'll excuse my slightly scruffy appearance today. And but today I'm going to talk about moral luck. Next slide, please. Okay. So the main question of the issue is, we think, look, luck is a part of life. You might think it's luck. Well, obviously it's luck whether you win the lottery, but in other cases it might be luck whether you get a job if you happen to know or not know someone who's on the interviewing team. It might be luck whether you're born rich or born poor. It might even be luck whether you happen to hit a traffic jam or not. Luck is really pervasive. But you might think, well, morality is the kind of thing that's immune to luck. That morality is one of the things, doing the right thing, acting in a way where maybe you can't be blamed, is not the kind of thing where luck could be involved. And moral luck is the phenomenon where that doesn't seem to be the case. So just going to talk about some questions on either side about whether there could be moral luck. Next slide, please. So the way into this, the standard way into the question of moral luck, is something called the control principle. And there are several different versions of it. But the version I'm going to talk about, which is in blue on the slides, says one should not be, for example, praised or blamed based on things outside one's control. And that's a bit of a mouthful. I stumbled over it. But the thought is that whether you're morally praiseworthy or blameworthy should really only depend on things that were up to you. And one way to get at this is to think, if something was completely outside of your control, it would be unfair to blame you for it. It would be unfair to say that if I say to you, that thing you did, that was wrong. And you say, what do you mean that thing I did? I had nothing to do with it. That seems like you've really shown your moral innocence. To say that you're morally responsible for a situation seems to imply that you had some kind of control over the situation. And it would be unfair to blame you otherwise. Except in an odd situation, it would be unfair of me to blame you for something someone else did. And sometimes, to talk not about morality but about the law, people might be hinting at the control principle when they say things like attempted murder should be punished just as strongly as murder. The thought being that, well, whether it's murder or attempted murder, both is outside of your control, assuming the murderer tried as hard in both cases. So it looks a bit strange to give a lighter sentence to an unsuccessful murderer. So the control principle can be seen as saying there is no luck of a certain kind in morality, that morality depends, or praise or blame depend on things that are within your control and therefore immune to certain kinds of luck. Next slide, please. The control principle, at least if I've done an okay job, should sound pretty plausible. Most people think it seems to embody some kind of virtue of fairness or something. The trouble is moral luck. The control principle sounds very good in general terms, but it starts to get easy to describe specific cases where the control principle doesn't apply or looks like it doesn't apply. And there are several different varieties of cases of moral luck. And I'll describe two cases. And then I'll talk about some ways of responding to the issue. You might say, well, there's no moral luck. We're wrong about the cases. Or you might say, turns out there is moral luck. The control principle isn't true. But it's really more of a puzzle. So what I'll do now is talk about some instances of moral luck. And they tend to be kind of fun cases of moral luck. Next slide, please. So the first kind of luck I'm going to talk about is called resultant luck. And you can think about it that there's luck in what the results of your actions are. And this I already hinted at when I talked about attempted murder versus murder. But most of us, commit minor little acts of negligence throughout the day. So, for example, if you drive and nobody is a perfect driver. Nobody follows the highway code, which is a British guidebook on how to drive, all the time. We all sometimes look down, even just to fiddle with the radio, just for a second. Obviously, you shouldn't text and drive. I'm not talking about things of that nature. I'm just talking about glancing in the back seat to check on the kids, just for, a quarter of a second before looking back at the road. Or not quite allowing enough distance when driving in the rain. Or, there's lots of non-driving based examples as well, obviously. But things like, to pick a contemporary example, if I have a cough right now, it might be a minor negligence on my part to think, well, it's not really a persistent cough. It's probably not anything to worry about. Okay, so let's stick with the driving example. You happen to be driving along on a relatively dark street at night, and you notice it's 5 to 8, so you just glance down to turn Radio 4 on, because it's nearly 8 o'clock and you want to hear the headlines about what's happening with the pandemic. So the only things within your control are that you're driving and that you glance down to flick the radio on. What's not in your control is whether at that very moment someone steps into the road. And so there's two cases. In one case, someone steps into the road and you hit them and you kill them. In the second case, no one steps into the road and so nothing happens. And in both of those situations, everything that was up to you, everything that was within your control, is exactly the same. But in one case, you've committed a minor negligence. In another case, you've killed someone by driving dangerously. And most of the time, I think most people would think quite differently of you in the two cases. In one case, you've done something awful and you're really morally blameworthy, and people would seem to be justified in blaming you. In the other case, you might get a bit of a finger wagging, you ought not to do that, but we don't think of you as having done anything seriously wrong. Just a minor negligence, the kind we're all guilty of. Just another kind of example, which I think is due to Thomas Nagel. This is before mobile phones, but the example is you're giving a baby a bath and the phone rings and you run downstairs just for 30 seconds to answer the phone, or 1 minute. If you come back upstairs and the baby's happily playing, hey, you probably shouldn't have done that, but no harm, no foul. If the baby's drowned while you were on the phone, then once again, you've done something awful, and we might think you deserve everything you get. So that's resultant luck. Next slide, please. Another type of luck, and this looks quite different, is circumstantial luck. So let's just assume, hopefully it's true, that most of the people we know lead relatively morally blameless lives. There are some arguments out there that morality is very demanding and that we, for example, are leading quite blameworthy lives for not devoting, 2/3 of our income to global charities. But setting that aside, sort of common sense thought that I don't attack anyone, I don't kill anyone, I don't steal. That's okay. I'm relatively morally blameworthy. But you think, well, it's a matter of circumstance, luck, that I was born in Britain in the early 80s. It's not within my control where and when I was born. And just as a statistical matter, I can probably know that, well, if not me personally, but if many of us were born in different circumstances, and sort of the classic example is if you lived during the Nazi period in Germany, but that example is a bit of a cliche, but we know that statistically many of us would have, even if we wouldn't have, murdered people or acted as guards in concentration camps, most of us, we can know statistically that very, very few of us would have actively resisted the Nazis, for example. And at least some of us would have done horrible things. So here we have some luck. Let's suppose that I lead a blameless life in the UK now, but had I lived in Germany in 1943, I would have done something horrible. Then that's a matter of luck. It's a matter of luck that I haven't done something horrible. But it just seems to be moral luck, because it would be a bit strange if someone were to come up to me and say, "You, Luke, you're a murderer." And you say, "What? I haven't killed anyone." "No, but you would have." What do you mean I would have? "Well, you would have if you'd grown up under a dictatorship." Well, that just shows that I'm lucky that I didn't. Right? That's one kind of circumstantial luck. And it would also seem to be strange if we were talking about someone, say, who participated in a genocide, I don't want to reuse the Nazi example. There's been, unfortunately, lots of genocides. We don't want to say of someone who participated in a genocide, oh, well, we shouldn't judge them too harshly, because, after all, had they been born in the West in the 80s, they wouldn't have done anything wrong. That would seem to be a strange thing to say, too, about someone who is a murderer. So this, again, looks like luck, moral luck, because what you do depends on the circumstances you're born into, but you have no control over the circumstances you're born into. So it looks like another violation of the control principle, although quite a different kind of violation from the one that we saw with resultant luck. Okay, next slide, please. So the problem is, the sort of what you might call the paradox of moral luck is, in general, most of us, not everyone, but most of us find the control principle plausible and we claim to accept it, and we think it would be unfair to blame people for things outside their control. On the other hand, when confronted with specific cases, we seem not to apply the control principle. We do want to treat someone who hits a person on the road differently from someone who didn't. So this seems to be a puzzle. These two things seem to be in tension. On the one hand, our verdict on this very general principle, and on the other hand, what we think about the specific cases. So there's quite a few different ways of resolving this apparent tension or paradox, and I'll just talk about two of the most important ways of resolving it. Next slide, please. One response is just to say, oh, well, I guess the control principle was plausible, but hey, looking at these cases, we can see that, no, the control principle is not true. Looked plausible, turned out to be a false hypothesis. So this account accepts moral luck. And two issues about this way of dealing with moral luck is, one, it seems to involve a lot of conceptual revision in that the control principle does seem obviously true. And just to say, no, whether people are praiseworthy or blameworthy does involve a lot of luck, does involve things outside of their control. That's a big change. I'm hoping if I did my job right, then in the first couple of slides, you saw the control principle and you thought, yeah, okay, that looks plausible. But now this view is saying, or this option is saying, actually the control principle is false. And another thought, a slightly more abstract one, is that if the control principle is false and there is moral luck, it might risk making morality less central to our lives. Because one of the reasons some people think that we care so much about morality is that it's immune to luck. It would seem strange to praise or blame someone for being born rich or poor, partly because that's not the kind of thing it would seem that they had any control over. But morality seems a bit different. You say, well, if you've acted morally well or badly, that's down to you. So that seems to ground a very important judgment of your character. And it seems fair to hold you to account to what you've done morally, or what your moral standing is. And I think part of that is because of the apparent absence of moral luck. It's fair to hold you to account to moral standards because there's no luck involved. So once we accept moral luck and abandon the control principle, it looks like we might have to put a bit less importance on morality. So this option is nice and simple, involves rejecting the control principle and accepting our verdicts in specific cases, but maybe is quite revisionary, involves more changes to our concepts than we might be comfortable with. Next slide, please. The other option, option 2, is to basically take the opposite tack, is to keep the control principle and ditch our judgments in the specific cases. So we say, no, the control principle is true. There's no moral luck. And sometimes we forget that. And so you might think, to focus on the driver case of resultant luck, you might think, well, because the control principle is true, we should judge you the same for looking down and fiddling with the radio, whether or not anyone stepped in the road in front of you. And so we might also, it's difficult to apply this in all the different cases. And so one thought is that a morality that follows the control principle might look very, very different. Just because our verdicts in all the different cases might have to be revised to comply with the control principle. So, to take a step back, if you want to punish attempted murder as harshly as murder in the legal example, well, you have to change the individual laws or how those laws are enforced. If you want to respect the control principle, it looks like a lot of our moral judgments are going to have to change. And one problem is that not only would it seem to be difficult to judge the two drivers the same, it also feels like it would be wrong. It feels like it would be making a moral mistake to judge the two drivers the same. After all, one person killed someone, and all the other person did was look down and fiddle with the radio. It would be quite a big ask to treat those two cases the same. Next slide, please. So I'm sorry to end on a slightly unsettling note. Moral luck is a puzzle. It's a paradox. And there are many proposed solutions out there. And I think it's fair to say that none of them have really been thought to be all that plausible. There are defenders of different solutions, but most of them, I think, at least to my eyes, all have problems. But I think one thing people can agree on is that many of our ordinary judgments, they don't seem to be as immune to moral luck as we might have thought. And then there are different ways out, different ways of saying, no, they are immune to luck. We're making a mistake. Or turns out there is luck. We made a mistake. And just one final piece of reading, a suggestion in case you want to read more, is a paper by Susan Wolf called The Moral of Moral Luck, which is available at that link. And I'm suggesting Susan Wolf's paper because she's a very prominent and brilliant academic philosopher, and she has a really excellent skill for writing in a rigorous way that contributes to the debate. As she does in this paper, she suggests a sort of intermediate position between the two I sketched, whilst also not writing in an overly complex or dense way. And also her cases, the examples she gives, are quite psychologically realistic. And that's it from me. Thank you very much.
Oops. Great. Thank you very much, Luke. Some very interesting thoughts that came up. I mean, I'm particularly interested around circumstantial. I think circumstantial luck and the kind of relation it has to the sort of nature-nurture debate, if you like, because you mentioned, in a sense, if you were born in place X as opposed to place Y, then you might have, predispositions in terms of the decisions that you make. From a moralistic point of view, certainly from statistical analysis that you mentioned. So the whole thing about free will comes into play there. Great. So I just wanted to thank you very much for that, Luke. Just wanted to highlight that we will be making this recording available on YouTube. So do go up there. And we have a whole host of recordings up there as well. So please do make use of those. If you enjoy the sessions, do subscribe to our channel, so you'll be notified of other uploads as and when they happen. And do get involved. We'd love for you to join as a member on our website. It's free, and follow us on the various social media channels. So thank you very much for joining us today, and we look forward to the next one. All the best. Bye-bye.